Yesterday, while I was at work, it was beautiful. Sunny, the temperature was just right. Today, nothing but gray. Welcome to Northwest Ohio, where you get Michigan weather and Ohio scenery. Beautiful. However, that plays directly into the experiment that I'm going to be playing with here today, and that is heating and air conditioning. So, sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're not, and you need to cool things up, you need to cool things down. You normally heat things up and cool things down, but when you're in my world, sometimes two are the same. Don't ask me how, but I have an experiment here, and this should be fairly straightforward. We're going to be testing normal pipes versus the insulated pipes versus the radiate pipes. We're also going to be making use of these new gas pipe thermal sensors here. So one of the cool things that we can do inside of this game now is that if we have a thermal sensor, which we got right here, we can sense the temperature inside of the pipe, which allows us to bring it down to a certain point and then move that gas or liquid onto the next zone. So, all right, so if we were to build a conventional air conditioner, similar to what you would see in your window or maybe outside of your house, it would look something like this. This is a more conventional setup. You have a compressor, you have a radiator on the hot side and a radiator on the cold side with a couple of fans. Well, we don't necessarily have fans inside of Oxygen Not Included. We do have usefull. We can move airs with air pumps, but we're gonna, disregard the fan component right there. And we also don't have an expansion valve because we're not dealing with phase change. So how this works in the real life is you have a compressor that makes the hot gases, and then that condenses, and then it expands, which cools, and then you get cold on the inside essentially and hot on the outside by adding power to the whole system right there. So it works similar to what we have over here in this arrangement, where we have a thermal regulator which simply drops the temperature of the gas that travels through it by 14 degrees Celsius. So in this case, we're using hydrogen because that's our best gas, because we're going to have a lot of thermal capacity for it, right? And then as we move it through there, that is then going to go back into where we want it to be on the cold side. So we have a gas pipe thermal sensor, which we will drive down to a certain temperature, and then once it stays there, then we will no longer run the thermal regulator. So essentially, we're turning off the compressor at that point. So as the cool gas over here moves around, it will then go back to the thermal regulator where it will exchange some of its heat for, to become cooler, but the thermal regulator will become hotter. So we're going to have a hot side over here on the left and the cool side on the right. So that brings up, how do we want to cool the thermal regulator? Well, in this situation, what I'm going to use is polluted water. I think that's one of the best ways we can actually get heat out of our systems is to use dirty water. So you can see I dropped a little bit of it in here, and that is at 2 degrees Celsius. We've seen in previous videos here that if you cool down something like a natural gas generator using a usefull, it will actually output the temperature that the natural gas generator is. So it will output polluted water that is very, very cold. There's also other sources of really, really cold polluted water around your base, not to mention 30 degrees. It's still going to take a lot to take that up to 100 degrees Celsius. So there's a lot of capacity for cooling inside of polluted water, even if it isn't already like really, really cold. But we also have a slush geyser if you really just want to use that, or you have that available. So over here on the left, I have a couple different sensors. I have a thermal sensor to make sure that we don't overheat the thermal regulator. So if we look at the automation, right, it's just a little AND gate. So if the temperature is, above what we want over here, then we're going to run the thermal regulator, and we're not overheating the thermal regulator, then that will operate. If we overflow, our drip, then we're going to want to make sure we activate the pump, and then this will probably run a valve as well. Down here on the bottom, we also have a temperature, so once we reach a certain temperature of polluted water, we're then going to pump it out into another chamber and bring in some nice cool polluted water. So that's the air conditioning setup right here in kind of a conventional manner. Now, there's several different ways we could make this more efficient. One, we could not have to cool it using a thermal regulator. So that's the most efficient method. If we put the hot side of our radiator into a cold biome over here, you can see that it's negative 33 degrees Celsius. And then instead of a thermal regulator, we can just use a little bit of a valve with the same sequencing right there, which we've seen in kind of my preview to the new update. So that you can just put a big radiator inside of there, and so the hydrogen as it comes in, it will just naturally cool down, exchanging that heat, or that heat will then go into the cold biome and get sucked up by all of this polluted water that is essentially ice. And that's a very, very efficient way to cool it down. Or if you want to use a thermoregulator because you want to get even colder temperatures than what you can get over there, maybe you're trying to liquefy polluted oxygen into oxygen, well, then you can stick your thermoregulator over there and do that number, or you can just, cool it like I'm doing here with polluted water. Now, the experiment that we're going to be conducting today is to try to figure out, do we really need to use radiant gas pipes or radiant liquid pipes? Because there's several different pipes, and I want to compare the pipes to figure out what we really need. So over here, I have several different test chambers, and we'll do a measurement to see just how quickly that's going to cool down. But let's see how this system works right over here, just to see what we're going to be up against. So I have brought in hydrogen at 100 degrees Celsius. Over here on the right is a chamber of oxygen at 100 degrees Celsius, and we're running this through a thermoregulator, which is being cooled by a puddle of polluted water. So let's see how long it takes this to cool down to a preset temperature that I have, which is 20 degrees Celsius. So we can see the thermoregulator over here on the left. It's operating at around 90 degrees Celsius. I've got a thermal shift plate behind it that's trying to pull some of that heat into the water. You can see the temperature of the hydrogen as it's running through the radiant pipe here. So it's dropped down to 72 degrees Celsius. For the pipe, I'm using copper ore. So we're coming up on half a cycle now, and we're down to 60 degrees Celsius down here at the bottom. The gas temperature inside of the pipe starts at around 47 degrees Celsius now, and it's exiting about room temperature. So that's exactly what we wanted to see. You can see here that since I'm using a gas bridge, I can just pipe this in, and I don't have to worry about, this system having too much gas or having options and having it, run slower, because it's trying to figure out if it's going to pull from this pipe or that pipe. So that bridge there is important to having this be a continuous operation. So it's been running for 3/4 of a cycle now, and we're down to 40 degrees Celsius. So it looks like we're going to be able to take this small area here almost down to room temperature, to the set temperature, in one cycle for just running one thermoregulator. Okay, so now we should start to see some sequencing start to happen here, because the temperature inside of this pipe, you can see it's about to get down there to the point where it's going to stop operating. I might actually want to take this pipe and put it on the inlet temperature, because now I'm going to get some, essentially it's going to run over or under the temperature that I set it to. So now it cooled down to 17.3 degrees Celsius, and this was all in one cycle right there, so we were able to cool that stuff down. You can also see that the polluted water over here, it barely budged in temperature. So that's probably some pretty good advice if we wanted to go ahead and take this gas pipe thermal sensor, and we're going to put it down there on the bottom. So that's actually under the ventilation tab. Thermal sensor. I just use iron because it's easy to get, and it works just fine. So that wants to be 20 degrees Celsius. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to replace this with some oxygen that's nice and hot. Or let's say natural gas. It'll be natural gas at 300 degrees Celsius, right? So maybe we're trying to cool that stuff down to a reasonable temperature using hydrogen and just a thermoregulator. Let's see how that runs. You can see we're about a quarter of the way into the cycle here. So that's 300 degrees of natural gas inside of there. So now you can see that the temperature inside of there, as we're entering the system, is 180 degrees. So it's really trying to cool it down the best it can. Alright, so I think we started with some really cold hydrogen. So the temperature dropped really fast at the beginning, and now it's kind of running at a fairly normal rate, I would say. We're down to 122 or so degrees Celsius. I don't think that's going to be a real valuable chunk of information right there. So what I want to do, though, is I really want to understand here. So Teebs over here pointed out a really important patch note that they released just a few days ago, actually, And what that is that thermal conductivity for heat exchange is now based on the average conductivity of the two elements instead of the minimum. This should improve temperature exchange of many things, including radiant pipes. So how does that affect our radiant pipes? All right, so that's a pretty significant change, but it's also one of these mathematical things, because if we look at the thermal conductivity here, we got a lot of thermal conductivity of your pipe, and then you've got the gas, which is going to be a fair bit less. So how do we understand what that means? So what I've done here is a visual experiment. I have several chambers here, each with 25 kilograms of oxygen at 100 degrees Celsius. I'll go ahead and top that off just before I run the experiment. And then I'm going to be bringing in hydrogen at 0 degrees centigrade. And that'll heat up the pipe that's there, and it'll also heat up the room as well. And then I have the thermal sensors set up to vent out into a vacuum if that gas gets above 30 degrees Celsius right there. So what we should see is over a cycle right here, what pipes are really going to be practical for creating an air conditioning unit inside of our base for temperature control. Because we may not even need to use radiant pipes. If we can, save our metals and just use rock, well, then that would be absolutely great. All right, so here I have all of my chambers at 100 degrees Celsius, of oxygen, 0 degrees hydrogen that's going to be brought in. Let's go ahead and see how this works over the next cycle right here. So over here on the left, just to let you know, I have, sedimentary rock. Here we go. We can see that some of this stuff is already venting. Oh, crap. And I can't pump fast enough. Oh, no! My poor experiment already? Well, I did learn something. 1, I need a lot more gas pumps. 2, the insulated pipes are kind of holding their temperature. All right, so I've reset the experiment, changed the way the gas is flowing through the system here so that we hopefully always have some hydrogen available. And what we just want to see from here is, what pipes are practical, and see if we can find a cheaper material or an easier to obtain material that, might save us some metal. So let's see what happens here. And should be fairly interesting. We got the hydrogen moving in, and you can see right up here, the radiant pipes just like run right in and then fly right on out. Or just about. We will see it vent over here to the right as things are entering this space, and then void is going to suck in the gas over here. Now there may be a little bit of heat soak actually through the abyssalite tiles now. We'll take a look at that, but let's just see what happens here. So the one that is quickly in the lead here, wolframite, as you would expect. All right, so we're just past halfway through the cycle here. Over here I have the normal pipes, so that's just going to be these guys over here, the gas pipes. In the middle insulated, you can see that most of these are really not changing the temperature of the gas inside of there at all. The hydrogen is, however, slowly warming up and then eventually, exiting the system. But you can see a big difference here. And then over here on the right we have the radiant pipes. This is the kind of hard to get materials, and abyssalite is not accounted for at all, as you could imagine. So just to give you some sort of idea, we have 57.8, around 63, 54, 69. So those are all, right around there. Over here on the far right, though, we have 39, 45, 29, and 34. So this is performing almost twice as fast as our normal pipes. But still, the normal pipes are actually doing a pretty good job. All right, so I'm at the end of the cycle here, and we can see the results. Over here on the right, all of the radiant pipes drop down and drop down quickly. Obviously, wolframite was the fastest performer, as you would expect. But over here on the left, there was one performer that stood out from the others. Granite, with a thermal conductivity of 3.39, is quite comparable to gold amalgam over here, with a thermal conductivity of 4. So that's really not bad, and probably a practical stone or material to use throughout your base if you really want to make a large radiator cooler, because granite is easy to get and you can use it all over the place. Plus, it's got some byproducts of it being plus 20% to core. Sandstone also performs quite well with a thermal conductivity of 2.9. So I would say really on the cold side of your base, if you really want to go and just radiate and cool your base to maintain its temperature, and then have your hot loop on the other end, a practical way to set that up would be to either use granite or sandstone, which are both going to be plus decor, so it helps you out. Have that inside of your base, in here, and then run your loop over to something like a cold biome, and inside of there, use radiate pipes if you have them. And there you can just use whatever metals you have available, because they all perform quite well. Obviously, if you have wolframite and you can spare it, wolframite's a great way to go. So on the cold side, you just have a sensor that, senses when the temperature has reached a certain degree, so maybe 0 degrees on hydrogen. You then pipe that back on over, and then it sits in here until it reaches a high temperature, and then it flows back on down. And you don't need to pump it. It just kind of flows normally. You just got to turn on and off the valves. So it's like 20 watts. I mean, how easy is that? And you can see what I did here with the temperature at the beginning. This being 19 degrees Celsius here resulted in the natural gas in this area being 20 degrees and going up from there. So that worked out pretty good. Wherever you put that sensor in your loop is really going to depend on, you can get kind of fancy with it, right? So one thing that really interests me as well is how little insulated pipes cooled down the gas that they're around. I mean, it basically didn't. All right, so I have a vacuum inside of here. Absolutely nothing can transfer around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a couple of chambers with abyssalite, just our normal tiles. And then we'll use insulated abyssalite tiles, and we'll see if they respond differently. So that is one tile. And now that we know that the thermal conductivity is the average of the two elements that are side by side, I want to see what happens when we double up the walls. Because the average between this and that should be really, really cold. Or it should basically be nothing. Oh, I'm failing bad. Stop. Oh my gosh. Dig. Alright, so when I put something hot over here, really what I want to see is that it can't transfer thermal energy from here to there. That's what I'm hoping to see. So we're going to do the exact same thing with insulated abyssalite tiles and see if they respond any different. Alright, so for my cold side, I'm just going to go ahead and use oxygen over here. Alright, so here's what I have set up. We've got abyssalite all the way around this. We've just got the normal tiles, and then we also have the insulated tiles. I have oxygen on both sides of the wall here. One of them is at 2,000 degrees Celsius. The other on the cold side is at 0. I want to see if this is going to heat up. So let's let it run. Now this was based off a post I saw over here, right? If I can get it on the screen. Crazy thing now is with insulated abyssalite tiles, you can see this, and then it was transferring across. Now I am running the most current build of the game, and it looks like they may have changed the way the abyssalite was working there. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and look at the updates. See if there was another patch after this one. Alright, so as we can see here, it looks like the latest patch, on top of the last latest patch, we're all in the beta builds, right? Crazy things happen, but just to kind of keep that misinformation out there, but also to highlight the fact that things change, and then they unchange, and then they rechange a lot in this game. It's not officially released. So we can see here that, yes, abyssalite tiles right here are like insulating, hot stuff from cold stuff. And we can see it's working, and it's working just fine. Alright, so there we have it, guys. I think that's enough for one episode. I thought I was going to get into liquids and stuff this episode, but it didn't happen. I guess we'll have to look at that again next time. Maybe we will take another look here at the, systems that are condensing polluted oxygen back into liquid oxygen and from liquid oxygen down. Because with these changes to thermal conductivity, it might just be possible. Plus, we got sensors on gas pipes and stuff. Oh, I don't know, man. I think there's some opportunities. There's also some opportunities on the other end, which is pumping really, really hot gas through things in order to heat stuff up and cook stuff like, fertilizer into dirt. we'll have to look at some of those systems here in the future. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little episode of Oxygen Not Included. If I've earned your subscription, then thank you so much for that. For those of you guys that are still watching, there should be 2 new things that you should be able to see somewhere here on my channel. There should be a sponsor button. Hopefully there is. I did enable it. In case you wanted to support the channel on there, or if you want to support me over on Patreon as well. I've got a new goal, which is to hopefully go full-time here on YouTube to bring you more content like this, but on a much more regular basis, rather than last minute. Make it my primary focus, and also some other things that I'm doing with the 3D printing and additive manufacturing. So hopefully I'll be able to introduce all of that to you here more in a more formal environment in the next week or so. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for your attention, and have a wonderful day. Stay awesome, guys. Peace. Brothgar out.